What if the most feared military power in the Middle East just proved in a single day that it's terrified of its own weakness? What if the loudest, toughest move a government can make is actually a quiet confession that it's losing? Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now, tap like you're pressing a launch key, and send this video to one person who still thinks Iran is winning this standoff. You'll want them to see how this story unfolds. Let's get into it. Right now, somewhere over the Persian Gulf, a fighter jet is circling. It has been circling for months, not attacking, not retreating, just watching, waiting. And that quiet, endless presence has done something that bombs alone could never do. It has broken the nerve of a regime that built its entire identity on never looking weak. For 5 months straight, the United States has kept a wall of air power stretched across one of the most contested stretches of water on the planet. Fighter jets that never stop flying their patterns, submarine hunters that circle for hours without a single break, surveillance planes that seem to live in the sky, and underneath all of that, a naval blockade that has quietly turned back more than 50 ships without firing a single shot at most of them. Notice that word, most, because that small detail is the whole story hiding in plain sight. Iran has tried, Iran has pushed, and in 5 months, Iran's navy has not broken that line. Not once. Think about what that actually means. An entire nation, with an entire military built around the idea of controlling its own coastline, has spent almost half a year failing to move past a wall of fighter jets and patrol aircraft. That kind of failure does something to a government built on fear and image. It cracks the foundation underneath it, and when the foundation cracks, regimes don't usually respond with calm, rational leadership. They respond the way a wounded animal responds. They lash out. They tighten their grip. They bring in the men who scare people the most. And that is exactly what just happened. In the last day, Iranian state media announced a complete shakeup of the country's military leadership. 6 new appointments signed officially in the name of the supreme leader himself. On paper, that sounds like strength. A leader taking charge, cleaning house, preparing his country for the next phase of a long fight. But look a little closer, and the entire story starts to fall apart in your hands. Because here's the problem nobody can ignore anymore. Nobody has seen that supreme leader in public for over 5 months. Not one photo, not one live appearance, not one unscripted moment. Nothing but a name attached to documents that nobody outside a small circle can actually verify. Meanwhile, American officials have suggested more than once that the real seat of power might already be effectively empty, propped up by loyalists who need the illusion of a leader far more than they need the leader himself. So ask yourself this simple question. If everything were fine, if Iran's grip on power were solid and secure, why would a government need to prove again and again that its leader is still alive and still in charge? You don't announce 6 new military appointments in someone's name because things are going well behind the scenes. You do it because you're terrified people will stop believing there's anyone steering the ship at all. And who did they actually bring in to steer that ship? Not moderates, not reformers, not calm, steady hands meant to guide a nation through uncertainty. The opposite. Hardliners. Men with histories that stretch back decades, tied to violence far beyond Iran's own borders. One of the men, placed at the very top of the Revolutionary Guard, has been wanted for over 30 years in connection with an attack on a Jewish community center on the other side of the world. That is the caliber of leadership Iran just handed its military. Not innovation, not diplomacy, just fear, weaponized once again and placed right back in the driver's seat. Think carefully about what that choice actually tells you. When a government is winning, it doesn't reach for its most extreme most hardened operators. It reaches for stability. It reaches for people who know how to manage a victory and build on it. But when a government is losing, when it feels the walls closing in around it, it reaches for the opposite. It reaches for the men who know how to survive chaos, because deep down, chaos is exactly what they believe is coming next. And the man now running Iran's naval forces within the Revolutionary Guard is not some neutral administrator sitting behind a desk. He now controls the exact branch responsible for laying mines in the strait, running swarms of small attack boats, and hiding what's left of Iran's aging submarine fleet somewhere in the shadows. You don't hand that job to a fresh hardliner if your real plan is to quietly de-escalate behind closed doors. You hand that job to him if your plan is to keep the most dangerous card in your entire deck primed, loaded, and ready. So while Iran plays this elaborate game of appointments and official signatures, ask yourself what's actually happening above their heads while all of this unfolds. Because the answer to that question is the real story sitting underneath all the noise. Above the water, American fighter jets are still flying their patterns day after day, night after night, without pause. These aren't flashy, headline-grabbing strikes designed to trend online. This is something far more effective in the long run. It's presence. It's pressure that never lets up, never takes a day off, and never gives Iran a single quiet moment to move oil, mass its boats, or simply catch its breath. Alongside those fighters, long-range surveillance aircraft are doing something just as important, but far less glamorous and far less discussed. These are converted airliners, retrofitted with sensors so advanced they can track submarines the size of a school bus hiding beneath the surface of the ocean. 9 crew members packed into the back of the aircraft. Hours spent in the air on a single mission. Sonar buoys dropped in careful, deliberate patterns across the water. Listening, searching, never stopping, never resting, never giving up the hunt. Iran is believed to still have a handful of small, quiet submarines built off old, outdated designs, meant to sit perfectly still in murky, noisy water where sound gets lost easily, barely 100 tons each, crewed by only a handful of sailors trained to disappear. Their entire strategy is to hide, wait, and strike, only when nobody happens to be looking. But here's the brutal truth buried inside that strategy. Submarines like that need to resurface eventually. They need fuel, they need repairs, they need to come home at some point, no matter how careful they are. And every single time they do, they become visible. Every time they surface, even briefly, they become vulnerable in a way they can never fully protect themselves from. It's a strategy that can only survive so long before it collapses under its own weight and exhaustion. This is denial warfare, not victory warfare. Mines and hidden submarines don't win a war on their own. They only delay the inevitable a little longer. They buy time. And time right now is the one resource Iran simply does not have enough of. Because while the military standoff plays out overhead, something even more devastating is happening underneath it all, far away from the cameras and the official statements. Iran's economy is collapsing in slow motion. The numbers tell a story that no amount of hardline appointments can hide from the world. Not long ago, 1 million units of Iran's currency was worth over $100 on the open market. Today, that exact same amount is worth barely 50 cents. Let that sink in for a moment. That's not a small decline you can explain away with normal market fluctuation. That's not a rough patch that corrects itself in a few weeks. That's a currency that has lost the overwhelming majority of its value in a shockingly short window of time. That's not the economic profile of a country negotiating from a position of strength. That's the profile of a country running out of road and running out fast. And on top of that economic freefall, there are reports circulating that Iranian officials have actually floated the idea of demanding compensation, essentially asking to be paid back for damage sustained during this very conflict. A conflict most analysts agree began because of Iran's own pursuit of a nuclear weapon in the first place, something that was never actually included in any formal agreement or sat on any negotiation table to begin with. It's a stunning position for any government to take. A country accused of funding proxy violence across multiple nations for decades, asking the world for a check, while the people footing that bill everywhere else look on in complete disbelief. Because let's not forget, even for a moment, who Iran has backed, funded, and armed over the years across the region and beyond it. Groups tied to bombings, kidnappings, and coordinated attacks stretching from the Middle East all the way to international waters far from home. Families who lost loved ones to roadside bombs planted by proxy forces. Sailors who lost their lives in attacks linked directly back to Iranian-backed operations at sea. Entire regions destabilized for years by proxy forces trained, funded, and directed with Iranian money and Iranian weapons. And now, in the middle of all of that history, the regime wants the world to sit down and talk about compensation for them. If you're finding this as unbelievable as I am right now, do me a favor and drop a comment below telling me exactly what part of this story shocked you the most. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what stood out to you. Now, let's talk about what Iran is actually saying publicly, because the specific wording here matters far more than most people realize at first glance. Iran insists loudly and repeatedly that it is not negotiating with the United States. At the same time, it openly admits to ongoing talks with a third-party nation, acting quietly as a go-between. That's not a contradiction happening by accident. That's a calculated, deliberate move. It lets Iran save face at home, telling its own people it refuses to bow to American pressure while quietly working. Every back channel available to find some way out of the pressure it's actually under. Meanwhile, officials in Washington have been direct, clear, and unusually blunt about the situation. The message has been simple. Naval forces maintain full control of the strait. Air power backs up that control from above, 24 hours a day. And when mines are placed in the water, they get found. Not eventually. Quickly and often before they can even be triggered. That kind of confidence doesn't come from guesswork or empty bravado. It comes from months of proven capability, tested and confirmed over and over again in real time, in real conditions, against a real adversary trying to prove otherwise. On top of the military pressure, new rounds of economic sanctions have been layered onto an already crumbling system that was struggling long before this latest round even started. And Iran's public response has been pure defiance. strong language, talk of resilience, promises that the country will not buckle under pressure, no matter how long this drags on. But defiant language and actua, a leverage, are two completely different things, and it's important not to confuse them. You can say you won't buckle all you want, as many times as you want. It doesn't change what your currency is actually worth on the open market. It doesn't refill an empty treasury overnight. It doesn't undo months of naval humiliation that happened in front of the entire watching world. This next part is exactly why you need to be subscribed already, because the story keeps evolving fast, and you don't want to miss the moment this pressure finally breaks. If the channel has earned it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now before we keep going. Let's take a step back for a second and look at the bigger picture, because there's a pattern here that's almost impossible to ignore once you actually see it laid out clearly. A country claims its leader is fully in control, yet nobody has seen him in half a year. A regime claims its navy remains a powerful deterrent, yet it hasn't broken a single blockade line in 5 straight months of trying. A government insists it's negotiating from a position of strength, all while its currency evaporates in real time and its economy spirals further out of control. Every single one of those claims collapses the moment you compare it, honestly, to the facts sitting right next to it. And that gap, the space between what a regime says out loud and what a regime actually needs behind closed doors, that's where the real truth lives. Iran says the Strait will never fully return to normal function under outside pressure. But what Iran actually needs, more than almost anything else right now, is that very same Strait open, flowing, generating oil revenue it desperately requires, just to keep its economy from collapsing entirely under its own weight. It needs that revenue more than almost anyone else in the entire region needs it right now, and it simply cannot get it. Not while air power rules the sky above the water and submarine hunters own everything underneath it, hour after hour, day after day. Every single day that blockade holds firm, Iran bleeds money it cannot replace from anywhere else. Every single day, the currency slides a little further into freefall. Every single day, the pressure inside the regime builds a little more, and the hardliners tighten their grip a little tighter, simply because tightening the grip is the only tool they have left in a shrinking toolbox. Now let's widen the lens for a moment, because Iran isn't the only place on Earth right now where slow, grinding pressure campaigns are reshaping an entire battlefield in real time. Thousands of miles away, deep inside Russian territory, a major fuel refinery was struck in one of the farthest reaching attacks of that entire ongoing conflict. This wasn't some small border skirmish you'd miss in the headlines. This was a strike hundreds of miles into Russian soil, hitting a facility responsible for processing millions of tons of fuel every single year without stopping. Local reports describe both casualties and significant damage on the ground. Russian officials claim they intercepted hundreds of incoming drones that same night, an extraordinary number for an attack that still somehow managed to set one of their most important facilities on fire anyway. Why does any of this matter in a story that's supposed to be about Iran? Because it reveals a pattern playing out across multiple fronts of the world at the exact same time. Modern pressure campaigns don't always look like massive invasions or dramatic ground battles fought over open territory anymore. Sometimes they look like patient, grinding attacks on the exact resources a country desperately needs to keep functioning day to day. Fuel, currency, command structure, public confidence in leadership. Take those things away, piece by piece, and eventually the whole system starts to buckle from the inside out, without a single decisive battle ever needing to be fought in the open. Russia is watching its fuel infrastructure burn, piece by piece, strike by strike, month after month. Iran is watching its currency evaporate, month by month, sanction by sanction, with no relief in sight. Different countries, different battlefields entirely, but strangely, the exact same underlying strategy at work. Apply relentless, sustained pressure to the systems a nation depends on most, and patience quietly becomes more powerful than force ever could be on its own. So let's bring everything back around to Iran now, because here's where all of these threads finally connect into one clear picture. A regime that has to publicly prove its own leader still exists is not a regime negotiating from a position of strength. A military that just underwent an emergency leadership purge in the span of a single day is not a military preparing confidently for victory. It's a military bracing hard for collapse and trying desperately to control the chaos before it spreads any further than it already has. An economy hemorrhaging value at the rate Iran's currency is currently hemorrhaging value is not the economy of a country that can afford to keep saying no indefinitely. Every piece of this story, when you lay it all out side by side, points in the exact same direction. Iran didn't make these dramatic moves because things are going well behind the scenes. Iran made these moves because the walls are closing in fast and the only tool left in the entire box is fear. Fear of hardline. Enforcers at home who might turn on leadership. Fear of losing what little real control still remains. Fear that if the illusion cracks even slightly in public view, the whole fragile structure comes crashing down along with it. And that brings us to the real question, sitting quietly underneath everything we've talked about today. What actually happens when a government runs out of real options and has nothing left in reserve but intimidation? History has shown us the answer to that question more than once, in more than one country, across more than one era. Regimes in that exact position rarely become more stable as time goes on. They become more unpredictable instead, more desperate, more willing to take risks that a confident, secure government would never even consider taking in the first place. That unpredictability is precisely why the entire world is watching this situation so closely right now. Not because Iran suddenly became more powerful overnight, but because a wounded, cornered power can sometimes become more dangerous in its final desperate moves than it ever was at the peak of its actual strength. But here's the other side of that same coin, the side that actually offers a small sliver of hope buried inside all of this tension. Cornered regimes don't just become more dangerous when pushed, they also become more fragile at the exact same time. Every hardline appointment, every emergency reshuffle, every desperate economic move, I guess also quietly, a signal of internal fracture happening somewhere out of view. Fear-based power structures are notoriously unstable over time because loyalty built purely on fear rather than genuine trust tends to collapse the very moment fear stops being effective as a tool. And right now, with a currency in complete freefall, a navy that can't break a blockade after 5 months of trying, and a leader nobody has actually seen with their own eyes in half a year, that fear is being tested in ways it hasn't been tested in a very long time. So where does this realistically go from here? What actually comes next for a regime standing in this exact position? Realistically, Iran has very few real paths left open to it. It can continue leaning heavily on proxy forces and small, deniable attacks, the kind of tactics it has relied on for decades, specifically to avoid direct, open confrontation with a stronger power. It can continue stalling through indirect negotiations while publicly denying any real talks are happening at all, hoping the pressure eases before it has to make a real decision. Or, eventually, it can be forced, not by choice, but by sheer economic necessity, to make real meaningful concessions, simply because its economy cannot survive much longer under this level of sustained pressure without breaking completely. What it likely cannot do, no matter how hard it tries, is keep pretending everything is under control, while the numbers, the leadership vacuum, and the repeated military failures all say the exact opposite so loudly. At some point, the gap between the official story and the actual reality becomes too wide to hide any longer, and the whole narrative starts to crumble in full public view instead of quietly behind closed doors where it's easier to control. And that's really the story sitting at the heart of everything we've covered here today. Not a single explosive battle, not one dramatic missile strike that dominates headlines for a day and fades, just the slow, grinding, undeniable proof that patient pressure, sustained without flinching for month after month, can do more lasting damage to a regime than almost any single attack ever could hope to achieve on its own. An entire military command structure just got rebuilt in barely a single day, not because Iran is stepping confidently into a new position of power, but because it's fighting to survive one of the most fragile moments in its entire modern history. A currency has been gutted down to a small fraction of what it was worth just a short time ago. A navy has failed, month after month, to break a blockade it publicly insists doesn't even meaningfully exist. And a leader that the regime desperately needs the world to believe is still firmly in control hasn't been seen by a single living soul in public for well over 5 months straight. You don't do any of that from a genuine position of strength. You do it when you're completely out of better options and running low on time. So here's the real question worth sitting with as this video comes to a close today. When a government has to keep proving over and over again that its own leader is still alive, when it has to keep signing official documents in a name nobody outside a small circle can actually verify, when it has to keep replacing its own generals just to appear like it's still fully in control, how much longer can that illusion realistically hold together before it finally gives way? Because illusions built like that one rarely fail with a single loud, dramatic collapse that makes headlines overnight. They fail quietly instead, one small crack at a time, until one day the whole structure gives way all at once, and everyone looking back suddenly realizes the warning signs were sitting there in plain sight the entire time, waiting to be noticed. We just watched several of those exact warning signs unfold in a single day, right in front of us. And if history has taught us anything at all about regimes like this one, they almost certainly won't be the last warning signs we see before this story reaches its final chapter. If this video helped you understand what's really happening underneath all the headlines and official statements, that's exactly why this channel exists in the first place. Hit subscribe right now so you don't miss the next update the moment it breaks. Drop a like if you made it all the way to the end with me. And let me know in the comments below what you honestly think happens next. Does Iran manage to hold on a little longer? Or does this pressure finally force the real change everyone's been waiting to see? I'll see you in the very next one.